영어원서 읽기 500번 읽기 14번째 도전. 오늘은 책을 보지 않고 소리로만 듣고 따라해 보도록 하겠습니다. Vernacular, Book 1. Editor's Note. The book you are about to hear was brought to my attention in a most unusual way. One Friday afternoon, just before closing time, I heard a scratching sound at the front door of my office. When I opened the door, there before me stood a sad-eyed, droopy-eared dog, carrying a large plain envelope in his mouth. He dropped it at my feet, gave me a soulful glance, and with a great quiet dignity sauntered away. Inside the envelope was the manuscript of the book, together with this letter. Gentlemen, the enclosed story is true. It happened in this very town to me and the family with whom I reside. I have changed the name of the family in order to protect them. In all other respects, everything you hear is factual. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Harold. I came to writing purely by chance. My full-time occupation is dog. I live with Mr. and Mrs. X, called here the Monroes, and their two sons, Toby, aged 8, and Pete, aged 10. Also sharing our home is cat named Chester, whom I am pleased to call my friend. We were a typical American family, and still are, though the events related in my story have their effect in my life. I hope you'll find this tale of sufficient interest in your readers and warrant its publication. Sincerely, Harold X. Vernacular. Chapter 1. Dear Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid this now tired-eyed arbiter. I'll be left home with my family and with the animation to take care of the house until they return. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think their way of making of not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anywhere. You can lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And people being implied if you fall asleep and start snoring or scratching yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out of my favorite rug in front of the nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that person at night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows. The wind howling and pretty good to be indoors. I was lying in the rug and having my paws, just staring out absolutely per door. My friend Chester was called on the velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out as his own. I saw that once again. I called him and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing to pregnant Chester more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this library, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who he was. The Monroes. It seems just about the time to be over. After the moment, the front door flew open. There stood on the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle. A bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad! Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," someone calmly under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about first? Stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle of the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found them. You drop him. I will not. You will too. Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mr. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved with having the boys out of the court, so she didn't take it at all. My tranquil evening has been destroyed, and no one has even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. Harold, cried Toby, guess what happened to me? And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel like I must explain this something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with great respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happened to them is explained to us. It's never been just, good boy, Harold, or use the little box Chester at our house. Oh no, with us it's, hey Harold, Dad got a raise and now we're in a higher tax bracket, or come sit on the past Chester and watch this wild. You can see the relative, so how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are therefore rather special pets. So it wasn't at all surprising to me. They took the time to explain the strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of a little bundle with glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than treat over the feet of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tipped the audience to sit down very quietly. They wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from the chair and squealed and said up something. Mr. Muller told him to stop making a fuss and moved another seat. And in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he sat on. An usher came up to shush them. Then Mr. Muller borrowed the flashlight. What they found on Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle was now sitting on Mr. Muller's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center of the tiny blanket arrived the rabbit, sitting in the shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied in his leg and a ribbon. There was words in the ribbon. They sounded a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for the better look. Now, most people might call me a Mongoler, but I have some pretty fancy bloodline running through these veins, and Russian wolfhound happens to be one of them. Because my family got around I was able to recognize the languages to your dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, they read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell it wasn't a note from the believed mother. The little guy was shriveling with fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Monroe and the boys would make a house for him out of the old crate held with the heavy wire mesh garage. For the night, the boys would make a bed for him and the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Monroe went to the kitchen to get some milk and letters. Mr. Monroe sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he wondering how many came sitting on his room with a raincoat, with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chester, and the two of us casually moseyed up to the corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think a rabbit should like milk," he answered. Chester and I were unable to continue our conversation because the deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Mom, Toby broke the rabbit's house." I didn't. I just dropped it. People let me come here in. "It's too big, Toby. It's too little." "I'm not. You are too." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Monroe called out as she entered the Vickers and Redders. "Let's get in his real hysteria as a festival, please." Chester turned to me and said under his breath, let us as Percy." I certainly wasn't able to argue with him. I was a worried man myself. At that moment, a crate arrived, barely standing strain of being pulled in two directions at once. "Mom, Toby said he was kicked the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold just sleeps in his room." Only sometimes, I thought, when I listened to get locked over the sandwich on his drawer. Toby is a nice kid, don't get me wrong. His stash with me. It was, after all, at one of the light and the party Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in the hot chocolate cake ever since. Peter, on the other hand, he doesn't believe in sharing. It was the only time I tried to sleep on his bed. He rolled around me and pinned me by my ears, and as I couldn't move the rest of the night, I had a kick on my neck for next days. But this is mine. I found him. You sat on, you mean. I found him. You're sleeping in my room. You can keep Smelly Old Harold in your room, and Chester too, if you want to. But I'm gonna keep the rabbit in mine. Keep the rabbit in mine. Smelly Old Harold. I would have beaten his ankle. I knew he hadn't changed his socks per week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's a light there. You get most of the fresh air. Pete's taller than I am, Toby cried. Who'll be able to see the rabbit better? Too bad, Squirt. Okay, said Mrs. Monroe to clench the teeth. Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep. Why? Peter asked. I don't want to go to sleep. Mrs. Monroe smiled a little too sweetly at Pete. Look, Mom, said Toby. He's not drinking his milk. Chester notched me in the ribs. Didn't I tell you? He asked. Excuse me while I make myself available. Hey, said Toby, we got a name. Can't that wait until tomorrow? Asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. No, we have to name him right now. I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days in my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe suggested. Well, all right, sighed Mr. Monroe. What about Jose Bun? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck! Oh, we all said. Well then, how about Floppy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chester, who had also been named Floppy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Mullen's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chester, not now, pushing him aside. He wants to help us name him, don't you, Chester? They scooped him up a top. Chester shot me a look, but in his mind, come on, Harold, Toby called. You got to help him name him too. We all peered into the box. It was the first time I've really seen him. So, this is a rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he's got longer ears and shorter tails, and on motors in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment in silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy owns a movie theater, he answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? No, I had a dog named Prince once, he replied namely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, and so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna name the favorite. I will traumatize you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please. And each please, he squeezed the chest a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the phone at the milk and moved into the kitchen. Chester followed her every move with his eyes, as it now seemed to be popping up his head. When she reached in the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We are compromised. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie. So we will call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula? That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me, Mother Chester? I'm a little bit happy to put down the milk. Well, guys, is this okay with you? Toby and Peter looked at one another, and Dad and Rabbit. A smart growled. Yeah, Mom, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to pet him. Okay, I'm going to put the milk back at the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping a frantic cat on the floor. And he would like it. And looked at the look. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached out, patting Chester on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mr. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Peter said sarcastically, what I took to be his attempted Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw the prickle movement in the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, Smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with a great finality when she came back into the living room, and then more calmly. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe up to the stair together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But Nicola, I could never have thought of that. I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chester was still sitting by the front kitchen door on the state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they hadn't named him Fluffy, was all he said. Chapter 2, Music in the Night. I feel at this time there are a few things you should know about the Chester. He's not your ordinary cat. But then I'm not your ordinary dog. Since ordinary dogs wouldn't be writing this book, right? Would he? Chester came into the house several years ago as a birthday gift from Mr. Monroe, along with 2 volumes of G.K. Chesterton, hence the name Chester, and the first edition of Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. As a result of this introduction to literature, and given the fact Mr. Monroe as an English professor, Chester developed a taste for reading early in life. I, on the other hand, have developed a taste for books. I found Jonathan Livingston Seeger particularly delicious. From Chester's Clifton on, Mr. used him as a soundboard in all his students' lectures. As Chester doesn't fall asleep, during the Mr. Chester every night with the family sleeping, Chester goes to the bookshelf, selected his midnight reading, and calls up on his favorite chair. He especially likes mystery stories and tales of horror and the supernatural. As a result, he has developed a very vivid imagination. I'm telling you this because I think it is important to you. Before I relate to you the story of the events following the arrival of the vernacular in our home, let me begin with that first night. It seems that after John went to sleep, Chester is still stewing on the lost milk. Settled down on his latest book, attempted to ignore the stumbling of the stomach. The room is quiet. This does not prevent his reading, of course, since, as you know, cats can see in the dark. A sharp moonlight barely across the cage and spilled onto the floor below. The wind and rain had stopped, and as Chester led, as good Edgar Allan Poe, the foe of the house usher, increasingly aware of the eerie stillness that were taking their place. As Chester tells it, he suddenly felt compelled to look at the rabbit. I don't know what came over me, he said to me next morning, but it could chill down my spine. The little bunny had gone to move first time since he put it in his cage. He lifted his tiny nose and his tail deeply, and it was gathering sustenance in the moonlight. He slicked his ears back close to his body into the first time. Chester said, I noticed the curious marking on his forehead, but seems ordinary black spots between his ears took on a strange V-shape, which connected with the big bed that covered his back, each side of the neck. It looked as if wearing a coat. No, more like a cape than a coat. Through the silence had dripped the strains of a remote exotic music. I could have sworn it was a gypsy violin, Chester told me. I thought that happened. A caravan was passing by, so I ran to the window. I remembered my mother telling me something about the caravans when I was a puppy, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember what. What is caravan? I asked, feeling a little stupid. A caravan is a band of the gypsies traveling through the forest and their wagon, Chester answered. Ah, yes, it was coming back to me now. Station wagon? No, covered wagons. The gypsies travel all through the land, setting up camps surrounding great bonfires, doing magical tricks, and sometimes if you cross their palms with a piece of silver, they'll tell you your fortune. You mean if I gave a pork, they'd tell my fortune? Just to look at me as disdain. Save yourself, Ware, he said. It wasn't a caravan, after all. I was disappointed. What was it? I asked. Chester explained when he looked out the window. He saw the Professor Middlewhite as a next-door player, playing the violin in his living room. He listened for a few minutes for a hunting melody and sighed with a relief. And I really don't stop reading these horror stories every day, late at night. It was beginning to affect in my mind. He yawned and turned to go back to his chair and get some sleep. As he turned, however, he was startled when he saw. There in the moonlight, as the music filtered through the air, sat the bunny, his eyes intense and staring, and inertly unaware of. Now this is the part you want to believe, Chester said to me. And as I watched, his lips parted in his hideous smile, and where a rabbit's broad teeth should have been, two little pointed fangs glistened. I wasn't sure what to make of Chester's story, but the way he told it, it set my hair on end. Chapter 3. Some unusual goings on. The next few days passed uneventfully. I was very bored. A new arrival slept all day, and Chester, whose curiosity has been aroused but it's strange, had decided to stay awake every night to observe him. Therefore, he too must have stayed sleeping, so I had no one to talk to. The evening much better. Toby and Pete, who used to play with me as Sim got home from school, now and immediately to their silly little cage, play with him. Or at least they tried to. But Nicola did not make the energetic playmate. It took him quite a while to wake up each night, and then when he did awaken, he didn't do much except hop around the living room. He didn't play catch. He didn't fetch. He didn't roll over to get tummy rub. I couldn't understand why they played with them all. I expected it would be because he is new and different, but I was confident that they would soon tired of him and then come back to trusty old Harold. Finally, on the morning of the fourth day, I caught Chester bleary eye of the water dish. He grumbled at me in a most unpleasant manner. You know, Chester, you were never exactly charming in the morning, but lately you become downright grumpy. Chester growled in response. What are you doing this for anyway? What are you looking for? He's just a cute little bunny. Cute little bunny. Chester was amazed by my character analysis. That's what you think. It's a danger to this household and everyone in it. Oh, Chester, I said, with an indulgent smile. I think your reading is down to your head. It's just because I do read, I know what I'm talking about. What are you talking about? I still don't understand. I'm not sure yet, but I know there's something funny about that rabbit. That's why I have to keep alert. But look at you. You are exhausted. You're asleep all the time. How can you call that alert? I'm awake when it's important. He sleeps all day, so I sleep all day. So just what have you seen says that personality would you make it easy. Well, said Chester, I that is. At this point, Chester started to bathe his tail, which is a cat's way of changing a subject he finds out comfortable. He then stumbled sleepily in the living room. So, I asked again, following him, what have you seen? Nothing, he snapped, and then proceeded to curl up in his chair to go to sleep. After a moment, he opened one eye. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to see. For the next few mornings, it was the same routine. I'd be ready for a good wrap around the living room, and Chester would go to sleep. Pete and Toby rest school, Mr. Monroe and at the university. He never did too much romping around anyway. Mrs. Monroe was at her office, no one to play with the poor neglected Harold. At first, I thought I could strike and maybe teach him a few tricks, but I could never wake him up. He was always waking up just about to sunset. I wanted to take a snooze. A rabbit I included. Cute to look at, but generally useless, especially as a companion to dog. So I would reply each day, favorite shoes to the rug and chew. Now, some people, especially Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, can understand my taste for shoes and yell at me to snacking on them. But I always said them no one accounting to taste. For instance, I remember one evening when Mr. Monroe picked some of his sour ball out of the bowl on the chair and the green one on the floor. He didn't notice that as I rolled across the room and landed near my nose. I decided that this is the perfect opportunity to try one for myself. I placed it in my mouth and wasted immediately. I haven't. I have tears started running from my eyes. What's wrong with my mouth turning inside out? Mr. Monroe immediately noticed something had happened. What's the matter, Harold? Are you looking for someone to kiss? Help! Help! I wanted to cry, but all that came out was ooh sound. I oohed for days. So how can anyone who likes the green sour ball criticize me for playing a nice penny loafer and the bedroom sleeper? But back to the matter of him. One morning, Chester had news. That bunny, he whispered to me across our footboard, got out of his cage last night. Don't be ridiculous, I said. How could he break through that wire? Look out, how little it is. Just that. Just break through the wire, out breaking anything open and then indoors. I looked puzzled. So Cheddar told me the following story. Now, Harold, he said, I don't want you thinking I'm not a good watch cat, but after a few hours last night, I grew curious about the time. I went into the hallway, and you know that new clock they've got, the big one, that goes all the way to ceiling. Well, see, it has these things in the middle called the pendulum. At first, I figured I just leave it alone. It looks like the spool that tied on the string on the doorknob on the plane when I was kitten. Every time I had this silly spool with my paw, it was a swing that hit me in my nose. But I had that toy. So, naturally, but I saw this room. I decided not to have anything to do with it. I checked the time. It was midnight. I was all set to go back to the living room when something stopped me. Curiosity? I ventured. I suppose you could call it that. I preferred to think of it as a challenge of the unknown. I put one paw over my nose and reached out with the other one and gave it one good smack. It then broke my eyes. It's still tender. So how swollen it is? He showed me a little paw. I couldn't see anything wrong, but I knew better than to argue with him. Oh, yes, I said, it looks terrible. You must be suffering awfully. You better go easy today. He limped dramatically, stood pointing with the display on his new handkerchief and continued. I couldn't even get to the pendulum. Somebody had to put the glass in front of it. I was pretty mad. I was all set to go back. At the same time, I couldn't have watching the things move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It was just so easy to watch, and before I knew what had happened, I was waking up. You fell asleep? I asked incredulously. I couldn't help it. I didn't even know it had happened. But I looked up at the face at the clock. It was 12:14:5. I would be gone 45 minutes. I ran back into the living room, looked at the binoculars cage, and it was empty. I couldn't imagine what it was. Then I noticed a light coming from under the kitchen door. I went into the crouch, stalking the light when, click, I heard the refrigerator door close and the light went out. It must have been Mr. Malone having me with his midnight snack. I suggested. That's what I thought. I jumped on my chair, curled up real quick, and kept one eye open, pretending to be asleep. Slowly, the door to the kitchen squeaked open. This little head poked out around the corner and looked to the other side to see its coast was clear. Then, guess who came bouncing out of all by himself, and with that idiotic grin of his plastered all over his face? Well, I guess it was Mr. Monroe, I said. Nothing is wear the bunny pajamas and gets very tiny at night. Vernacular, huh? You got it. Unfortunately, I hadn't positioned myself, so I couldn't see him back into the cage, and I didn't want to let him know anything, so I had to stay put. I still don't know how he got out or back in. At this point, Mr. Monroe came down the stairs to make breakfast. I wondered if Cheddar hadn't drank a whole thing. He didn't met him fall in his sleep, as I said. His quite imagination. But I was game. After all, there have been any excitement in this place for days. Cheddar and I took our position under the kitchen table. We didn't have long to wait. Holy cow! Mr. Monroe yelled as he opened the refrigerator door. He took the funny-looking white things out of the fridge and held it in his arms. Peter, come down here. What is that? I whispered. Beats me, Cheddar answered. It looks like a white tomato. Very funny, I said, as Peter came into the kitchen. Peter, have you been playing with the chemistry set in here? No, Dad, why? I thought that this might be one of your experiments. Do you know what it is? Gee, Dad, this looks like a white tomato. Just then, Mr. Monroe and Toby came into the door. What's all the fuss about? Mrs. Monroe asked. We were just trying to figure out what this is. Toby pulled it down so we can get a better look. No, he said. It looks to me white tomato. Mr. Monroe took a long look. It really does look like a white tomato. There's one way to find out, said Mrs. Monroe, who always was a practical one. Let's cut it open and see what is inside. Everybody gathered around the table. I jumped up on the chair, and in all the excitement, no one noticed that I have my paws on the table, which under normal circumstances was discouraged. And Cheddar wasn't so lucky. Cheddar, get off the table, Mrs. Monroe said. Cheddar jumped on the Toby's shoulder to see the sharpest knife and cut it cleanly through the thing. It fell into the two halves. It's a tomato, all right, said Mrs. Monroe. Here are the seeds. But it's all white, Toby observed. And look, said Peter, it's dried. So it is, Mr. Monroe said, as he picked up one of the halves. There's no juice at all. Well, Anne, what do you think? Let's go in bed. I think I don't know, turning white people. Come on, she said, cleaning the table. Let's throw it out and I'll make them. Catch your paws on the table. Rats. Cheddar jumped down to the Toby's shoulder and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. They're said very important, I said. They're cooking bacon. A white tomato. There's a significant, Cheddar murmured. So it's a white tomato, I said, edging my kitchen door. What did that have to do with vernacular? I can tell you one thing, Cheddar said. I got a good look at the tomato. There were very suspicious marks on the skin. So? I believe with dentist marks. So tonight I'm going to reread the book I read last year. How fascinating, I said, as the aroma flying bacon wafted across my nostril. And what book might that be? The Mark of the Vampire. What? I stopped dead in my track. Meet me tonight after the others gone to sleep. You'd better take a nap today and you can stay awake. Chet closed his eyes. I shifted my look to Vernacular, who seemed to be asleep in the cage. The tiny smiles set upon his lips. A happy dream, I wondered? Or something else? My reverie was broken by the sound of crunching bacon. I was in the kitchen in a flash.